I'm Colonel Mill Askins of the Air Defense Command, United States Air Force. As I'm sure you know, the mission of the Air Defense Command is to protect this continent from any hostile air attack that might be launched against us. And as I'm sure you also know, the units of the Air Defense Command, which are located here in your community, are a very important part of this operation. In a very real sense, they represent your personal protection against any such enemy air invasion. My purpose in visiting with you today is to tell you a little more about how we in the Air Defense Command conduct our mission. Particularly, I would like to familiarize you with our newest weapon system, the McDonnell F-101B interceptor, which is now entering squadron duty here. In a few moments, I would like to discuss our mission with you. However, first, may I present to you the story of the outstanding McDonnell F-101B Voodoo.
There have been other airplanes that were built that were supposed to be multi-mission airplanes, and some of them could do a lot of things poorly and nothing really well, but I think the 101 demonstrates as an interceptor, as a fighter bomber, as a reconnaissance airplane. It does all of its stated missions pretty well.
Our F I thought was the most beautiful airplane. It had the best lines, and I thought it was beautiful in flight.
I think all of them were sleek, and it's certainly a tribute to the teammates that got them put together, and as well as those that flew them.
Comfortable to fly.
One of the greatest airplanes that I ever worked on.
First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody and everybody's associated with Boeing and with the Missouri Aviation Historical Society. Florissant is a very old community. We're actually older than the Constitution. We were formed in 1786. The Spanish commandant, Spanish governor named a commandant from one of the Frenchmen that lived here. And so we've got a long, rich history. It includes a lot of aviation history, as does the St. Louis area. So we're very, very proud of that. All the contributions that have been made to the national defense, a lot of that stuff has taken place in Missouri. Matter of fact, there was a Missouri president that formed the Air Force off of the Army, President Truman, and named Stuart Symington as the first Secretary of the Air Force, a senator from Missouri. So we have a long history of aviation going back to Lindbergh, and actually one of my great aunts passed away not too long ago at 104. She saw one of the first aircraft that was now Lambert Field. She lived over near there. Wow. Anyway, we have a special presentation today for somebody that doesn't know he's getting this, for Dwight Singleton. Dwight, if you could join us.
I like the look.
Dwight is a former Florissant resident. Now he wishes he still was. But his wife is actually a council member on the city of Hazelwood, great city of Hazelwood City Council, so they're very active in the community. And when this jet, actually just a little history, we got this jet, we're not quite sure if it was 2003 or 2004. It was at another location, then we moved it up here, we rededicated it. Todd has some of the details, but then of course, as just mentioned, it was vandalized, and Dwight headed the effort to restore it. So we have this plaque, it's Florissant Parks and Recreation presents to Dwight Red Singleton in recognition of your dedication, unselfish service, and valuable devotion of your time and expertise in the restoration of the City of Florissant's F-101 Voodoo fighter jet. November 11, 2012 is when that was rededicated. Thank you, Dwight. You're here.
Our mission this afternoon is to engage in a discussion about the F-101, and toward that end, we have a list of questions here that have been prepared by a variety of people, but there are questions that, one of them's an author who's trying to write a book on the subject, but there are questions that we wanted to try to get answered this afternoon. So to get things started, for those that have flown the Voodoo, please describe your first experience in the aircraft, either while flying it or as an observer.
I didn't get along with my ops officer very well. And when I got ready to go out and get my first flight, the division commander came down and said, "Well, Barney, who you check out today?" "Well, we're going to send Bob out. He may kill himself, but you got to take a chance here once in a while." Which made me mad. First time I'd ever flown an airplane with an afterburner. And they said you have to light them one at a time, you can't light them all at once. And they were all afraid you were going to hang one of those wheels. You wasn't going to get the gear up in time. And I came down and landed it and was just thrilled to tears that I had successfully flown this airplane. Barney came up to me and he says, "You made the best landing yet."
Well, I was in an F-86 squadron, and with about 2 weeks' notice, we were told we were going to move to another base that was moving from Moses Lake, Washington to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and we're going to get this new airplane, the F-101B. And we really didn't know much about what an F-101B was. We'd been flying F-86s, so my first impression of this airplane was everything is big and there's two of everything. We were, I was been flying a single seat, single engine airplane, and now we're in a two-seat, two-engine airplane that weighs about 4 times more than the F-86 did. So it was quite a big jump for us. We did not have a two-seat trainer at that time, and so we basically, our first flight in the 101 after we went through about a week-long ground school was a solo flight for us, and it was quite a thrill to do that and be totally amazed at the massive performance increase this airplane had over the previous airplanes I'd been flying. One of the early things that they did for us, that Mac did for us, was they sent Don Stuck out to give us a briefing on the airplane. Basically what he did was scare us. He came out with great tales of pitch-ups, which we didn't even have any idea what caused them or if they even existed, but we got a very good briefing from Don on the pitch-up characteristics. From that moment on, we flew around with one eye on the G meter, the other eye on the airspeed indicator, and being very careful.
What do you gentlemen recall from the early days of the F-101A program up until it entered service in May of 1957?
Well, the biggest thing was the pitch-up problem that we had. I don't know whether you want to talk about that or not, but it was an uncommanded nose rise when you were turning or pulling G's. The airplane would enter what we call pitch-up, where the nose would rise uncommanded, and 9 times out of 10 would go into an incipient spin. That was the problem with the Voodoo was initially, as Bob remembers, we had so many engine stalls. Just flying in pattern, you'd have engine stalls, and we spent a lot of time trying to get rid of the engine stalls. We've had problems with the other airplanes too. The F-15, for instance, had problems with engine stalls. But I think we spent a lot of time trying to improve the engine stalls by changing the airplane wing fuselage interface, and it since we couldn't go to high angles of attack being the angle between the relative wind and the angle of the wing chord line, we didn't realize we had a pitch-up problem until we delivered the first airplane in which Lonnie Moore, who was double ace had 10 victories in Korea. Lonnie pitched up on takeoff and was killed, and that started a very intense investigation on our part of the pitch-up program, and we had to define the angle of attack at which pitch-up occurred throughout the envelope, which is a very, very major program. And I think we ended up doing something like 200 pitch-ups. Now, not all of them were uncontrolled. If you went into the turn or increase the angle of attack at a slow rate, you could usually recover from it. At a higher rate, invariably you'd end up in a spin, an incipient spin in which you could maybe lose 10,000 feet. So it was a major problem, which we ended up solving, not with aerodynamic fixes. We tried many fixes, including strakes on the fuselage and wing fences, which it had nothing to do, or very little to do with pitch up. It would make the pitch up a little bit less severe, but didn't cure the problem. So we ended up putting a pusher so that the stick would automatically be driven forward if you reached a certain angle of attack. We had to define that angle at which it occurred throughout the speed range of the airplane, speed altitude range.
Okay, as the F-101B was introduced into service in early 1959, how did that transition go with a new airplane of such performance? And what do you feel that the Voodoo brought to the table for the air defense mission?
We were in the middle of the Cold War, and the perceived threat then was, well, these Russian bombers are going to take off and fly over the North Pole and come in and bomb our cities and so on. And so there was a huge effort in the Air Defense Command to protect the United States, and we had air defense bases, interceptor bases all across the northern tier of the United States. We had previously done that mission with F-86Ds, F-94s, and F-89s. Then I think the first airplane to come online to replace those early version airplanes was the F-102 and the F-104. The F-101 came a little bit later, and when we went to the F-101B model, most of the squadrons in our wing already were flying either the F-104 or the F-102. But the 101 had a huge advantage over those other two Century Series airplanes. One is they had a radar observer in the back seat. And previously in the F-86 and the 102 and 104 that I flew, we had to fly the airplane and work the radar. They had autopilots in those airplanes, but they were really pretty poor performance. So we really had a workload as the interceptor pilot that was tremendous. But in the 101B, we had a guy in the back seat who could use the radar, find the target, get locked onto him, and all we had to do was fly the little steering dot to put us in a position where we had launched either the, in the case of the 101, the MB-1 atomic warhead rocket, which blew everything out of the air within a mile, so it didn't really need to be guided. But then we also had radar-guided Falcon missiles on board also. So it was a huge quantum leap in the ability of an interceptor. Plus the 101 had a lot more fuel or a lot more range than those earlier Century Series airplanes. So we could, in effect, go out further from our home base and effect an intercept, which, of course, give our country a great advantage to be able to stand our defenses off at a greater distance like that.
The thing that was impressive to me with the 101B was its intercept capability. You know, in those days we were worried about the high flyers. And with the 101, you could accelerate, you could lock onto your target, accelerate to supersonic speeds, and engage the autopilot, and the autopilot would program the pull-up so that you would intercept the high flyer automatically. And that was very impressive, I thought.
My first flight at Wright-Patterson, first flight in a fighter aircraft, we just leveled off at altitude 38,000, and lo and behold, the left engine indicated we had a fire with a full load of fuel, and it seemed like everything broke loose in the cockpit. Shut down the engine, and the fire lights went out. Okay. Pilot started back, fired the engine back up, and everything went wild again, so he shut down. Chase plane, an RF, was down over Cincinnati at the time. He was probably 75 miles away. He came in, Max Mach, to check us out. And saw a little smoke trail on the underside, but nothing significant. It turned out that the thermal sensor on the engine had come loose and went over an inspection port, and that's what, so, anyway, that was an experienced flight, and I think I was still shaking a week later.
Turning to the RF-101, what were the early years like with not only a new airplane, but new cameras and new sets of capabilities as well?
Well, we had to check on the production airplanes, we had to check all the cameras, to check all the equipment, but one of the things was to take photographs. And the 101 had some beautiful cameras. And we had so many requests to take pictures of their homes or places in the country. And it was hilarious.
Okay.
I think this is probably true of any airplane that's new. And everybody in the factory says, it's ready to go. And the pilots and the squadron get it, and they find all kinds of things going wrong. And we had fuel transfer problems between tanks. We had hydraulic problems. There was all kinds of problems. But one thing we were really impressed with, we found a problem, and you guys went to work on it and fixed it pronto.
Starting from the pipe stem, tell us about your experiences with the Voodoo over Indo-China.
Pipe stem was the first of the 101s to go into South Vietnam. I was on the first flight of 4 that went down to Saigon, and the purpose was to participate in the Vietnamese Armed Forces Day. And that was in October of '61, September or October '61, I'm not sure about that. And the 101 stayed in Vietnam and or Thailand to 65, 65 or later. But we initially operated out of Tonsonet. It was an old airfield. We had to be careful when we taxied. We had to stop on concrete or we'd sink in because of the asphalt. While we were there, the shell company that was supposed to provide us the JP ran out of fuel. He says, we don't have any JP and it's not due in to dock for a couple of weeks. We were refueled with KB-50s who flew in there, and we refueled them, air refueled them, quote, so to speak, on the ground.
So what can you tell us about Mobile Zebra, Operation Blue Bat, the 1958 Taiwan Strait Crisis, the Berlin Crisis, and the RF-101 operations over Cuba?
I was one of the crew that was scheduled to go on Mobile Zebra, and was scheduled to be a spare pilot. One of the things that happened in this, I got to show you. We were on a test flight to Hawaii, and we took off from Shaw, and we had KB-50 tankers, and they aborted because of weather. So we decided, okay, let's go back home. Shaw was below minimums. So we were looking for where are we going to go? And they were talking back and forth, and Lambert Field was open. But we'd been told, Barney had been told, don't ever go there. You're not allowed to land there. Stay away. So we brought in 7 airplanes, and we landed there. And guess who met us? Mr. McDonnell met us. They all had on orange flying suits, and we all had lunch in the executive dining room. You can have that for your archives. When we finally got ready to go on Mobile Zebra, we were at George Air Force Base, and everybody's getting started, and guess who aborted? I did. Can't get one engine started. They can't get air to one of the engines. So I don't know what failed in there, but they got it fixed. So the next day I'm headed home, and I went to Laughlin and saw a friend, and the next day I headed home, and they were forecasting thunderstorms, and he says, but you can probably get over them. So I went out there, and these thunderstorms are really building fast, and I'm in out there and approaching Meridian, Mississippi, and I said, I better get over this thunderstorm. So I went into afterburner, and I was climbing up like crazy, but all that thunderstorm's climbing faster than I am. The guy went right on top of it, and I got a compressor stall. So I had to shut down one engine. And I said, now I got to go down. I went right down on top of this thunderstorm, and it just flipped me like a coin. And obviously, I had pitched up. I knew I had pitched up because I looked at the airspeed indicator, and it said 0. And I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm. I thought about bailing out, and I said, no, that's not very smart. I'll never survive that. And I was spinning and spinning, and the attitude indicator was spinning, and I pulled the drag chute. That worked. I was still spinning, and I was still concerned. And I said, all right, back to the basics. Needle ball and airspeed. And I got the airplane recovered. I popped out of the side of it. Side of the thunderstorm, I was at 17,000 feet. I had started at 47,000. So basically, the fault was operator error. Too high, too heavy, too slow. But I got the airplane home.
Okay, and this is really for anybody on the panel. What do you feel, 60 years later, has been the enduring legacy of the Voodoo?
Having been a pilot for a long, long time, there's some airplanes you don't want to admit to have ever flown, but I don't think the Voodoo ever would be there. You know, I mean, that's an airplane you can be very proud that you have it in your logbook.
Except for the demon. J40.
Yeah.
You know, just the performance was so outstanding. We're at Klamath Falls, Oregon. It's 4,000 foot elevation. We have about a 12,000 foot runway there. And when it got below 0, we had to make no afterburner takeoffs because we couldn't get the nose gear up. It would accelerate so fast on a cold day. We had a sister squadron with the F-104, which I later on was an F-104 test pilot at Lockheed. But back in those days, we had a drag race with the 101 and the 104. And the 101 would take off and easily win the race up to about 12,000 feet, at which point the 104 went a lot higher and faster. But down at low altitude, the 101 was just unbeatable. Getting back to the RF-4s or RF-101s in Vietnam, I had several friends lost in that mission. We would have a bombing raid somewhere up north in Vietnam, and you know, usually with F-105s, and there was some poor young chap in a 101 was destined to fly over it about an hour later. And the North Vietnamese anti-aircraft people, they knew the guy was going to come 1 hour later, about, and they knew what direction he'd come from because of the sun angle. So they were all ready for him, and this poor guy, you know, I heard that the 101 RF-101s had about a 70% loss rate in Vietnam in the missions going north. That's really unfortunate, but the airplane served its mission very well.
One of the things that impressed me is that the Voodoo had a max speed of 1.8. I've seen 1.85 in it, and the F-18 only goes to 1.8. So, I mean, there are different airplanes and different capabilities, but when you talk about pure speed, it had a fixed duct inlet, and not a variable ramp, and so it was limited in its forward speed too.
I started out in RF-80s and actually flew an RF-86. Believe an F-86 that had cameras in it, no guns, which was one of my favorite airplanes, obviously. But I think it was really tremendous to have an airplane that had a long range, had speed, could carry a full complement of cameras because it was a big airplane, and it could do that. And we took it all over the world.